She did not flinch when he said it. That was the part no one spoke about afterward. Not the words themselves, not the silence that followed, not the way his mother pressed her lips together as if suppressing a smile. What no one mentioned was that Cecily Wren did not flinch. She had learned not to. 2 years of marriage to Harmon Wren had been, among other things, an education in stillness. The dinner table was set with more care than usual that evening. Mrs. Wren, Harmon's mother, who had arrived 3 weeks prior with 2 trunks and stated date of departure, had insisted on the good china. Cecily had spent the better part of an afternoon polishing silver she rarely touched, setting out crystal that caught the candlelight in ways that seemed designed to remind her she did not belong among such things. The Penfields were guests, a neighboring family of some standing. Mr. Penfield and his wife, their eldest son Geoffrey, and a daughter whose name Cecily had already quietly committed to memory, Annalise. 17, nervous hands, eyes that kept finding Cecily's across the table as if searching for something to anchor to. Cecily had smiled at her. It was the kind of smile she had become very good at, present, warm, and costing her nothing, because she had long ago stopped putting anything real into rooms like this one. The conversation had moved through all its predictable channels. The weather, the price of wool, some business matter between Mr. Penfield and Harmon that Cecily listened to more carefully than anyone knew, because she had learned that men spoke freely in front of women they considered decorative. It was Mrs. Wren who turned the conversation. She did it gently, the way she did everything, not with a hammer but with the slow, patient pressure of water against stone. "My son tells me you painted the parlor curtains," she said to Cecily pleasantly. "The pattern I did," Cecily said. "How industrious." A pause, a sip of wine. "Though I do think the room was rather better before." Harmon said nothing. He was cutting his meat with great precision, the way a man does when he is concentrating very hard on not being in a room. Mr. Penfield cleared his throat. His wife reached for her water glass. Annalise looked at Cecily. Cecily set down her fork. She did it without a sound, without hurry. Then she looked at Harmon, not to plead, not to signal, just to see. He did not look up. "The curtains," Harmon said then, finally, still not looking at her, addressing the table at large the way a man might address a mild inconvenience, were her attempt at making the room her own. "I have told her before that the house is already as it should be. But she is." He searched for the word, or perhaps he had it already and was simply allowing it time to land stubborn. "That is the charitable version." His mother laughed softly. Mr. Penfield joined her, uncertainly. "She has always been like that," Mrs. Wren added. "Even before. Her mother was the same way. A handsome family, the Abbotts, but..." Another pause, another sip. "Headstrong women rarely make comfortable wives." "No," Harmon agreed mildly, "though one does what one can." He said it the way a man says something he has said many times privately, finally given permission to say in company. And then, as if the thought had simply occurred to him, as if it were an aside rather than the thing it was, he added, "The trouble is she has very little else to recommend her. Beauty does not sustain a household, and she has not even that." The table went quiet in the way that tables do when something has been said that cannot be taken back, and no one wishes to acknowledge they heard it. Annalise Penfield had gone pale. Cecily felt, what? She would think about that later, alone, in the small hours when the house was finally quiet and she had the luxury of examining herself honestly. What she felt in that moment was not exactly pain. It was more like the final confirmation of a thing she had long suspected but refused to name. A door closing. A question answered. She reached for her napkin. She set it on the table beside her plate. She rose from her chair, and she curtsied. Not a deep one, not a theatrical one, but the correct one, the one that said, "I have noted this, and I am departing with more grace than this table deserves." And she said quietly, "Please excuse me," and she left the room. No one stopped her. She stood in the hallway for a moment outside the dining room door. She could hear the resumption of conversation almost immediately. Harmon saying something about the wool trade, Mr. Penfield answering, the bright artificial recovery of a social evening from which one unremarkable woman had excused herself. She walked upstairs. She did not allow herself to sit on the bed, because she was afraid that if she sat, she would not be able to explain to herself why she should stand again. Instead, she opened the wardrobe and she looked at her things. 2 good dresses, 4 practical ones, a wool coat that had belonged to her mother, boots she had resoled twice because they fit well and she had not wanted to ask Harmon for new ones, a trunk at the base of the wardrobe. Empty. She had kept it empty. She had not known why, exactly, at the time. She understood now. She worked quietly and without rushing. She was methodical about it in the way she was methodical about most things, which was one of the qualities Harmon found tedious and she found necessary. She packed what was hers. The dress she'd sewn herself the winter before the wedding, the small portrait of her mother that had sat on the windowsill of her childhood room, the notebook in which she'd kept accounts. Her own private record of the household expenses, maintained in parallel with Harmon's official ledger, because she had learned early that the numbers did not always agree, and that no one would believe her if she pointed this out without proof. She left the jewelry. None of it had been given in the spirit of a gift. She left the books that had been Harmon's before the marriage. She left the shawl his mother had given her at Christmas, which had always felt more like a claim than a kindness. When the trunk was full, she closed it, buckled it, and sat beside it on the floor. From downstairs she could hear laughter. Harmon's voice, comfortable, expansive the way it always was among people he needed to impress. His mother's voice beneath it, a counterpoint, harmonizing. This was the version of her husband that the Penfields would remember. She thought about Annalise Penfield, 17, with uncertain hands and a face that had not yet learned to hide what it felt. She thought about what it would mean for a girl like that to end up at a table like this one, in a house like this one, with a man who catalogued her inadequacies for company over good china. She hoped someone would tell the girl. She suspected no one would. That was usually how it went. She did not sleep. She sat with her coat on and her trunk buckled, and she watched the sky outside the window move through its slow business of becoming morning. And when she heard the hall clock strike 4, she picked up her trunk by its handle and she carried it downstairs. The house was dark and still. She could hear Harmon snoring faintly behind his closed door. His mother was in the guest room at the far end of the hall, a room that had been, before her arrival, Cecily's sewing room, a circumstance Mrs. Wren had arranged with such quiet efficiency that Cecily had not understood. It had happened until it was complete. She set the trunk down by the front door and went to the kitchen. She had thought about leaving a letter. She'd composed several, across the long hours of the night, and discarded them all. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she had realized, somewhere around 2 in the morning, that there was nothing she wanted him to have from her, not even words. She ate a piece of bread standing up at the kitchen counter. She drank a cup of water. She put on her gloves. Then she went back to the front hall, lifted her trunk, opened the door, and walked out into the dark. The nearest town with a coaching inn was 4 miles. She had walked it before, on days when Harmon had the carriage, and the weather was fine, and she had decided that fresh air suited her better than waiting. She had not walked it in the dark. In early spring, with a trunk, she managed. She had discovered some time ago that she managed most things she had not previously been required to manage, which had begun to seem important in ways she was only now beginning to understand. The inn was called the Larkspur. She had passed it many times and stopped in once for tea when a sudden rain had caught her. The woman who ran it was broad-shouldered and unhurried and had served Cecily without asking questions, which she had found enormously restful. Her name, Cecily recalled, was Mrs. Draper. She was behind the front desk when Cecily arrived, doing something with a ledger by lamplight, and she looked up without surprise, which told Cecily either that she was a woman who was difficult to surprise, or that women arriving alone in the early morning with trunks was not unheard of in her line of work. "I need a room," Cecily said, "and I should tell you I can pay for 3 nights now, and I will need to make other arrangements after that. I wanted to be honest with you from the start." Mrs. Draper looked at her for a moment. "Where are you coming from?" "Wren Hall. 4 miles east. Harmon Wren's house." "Yes." Another moment, then Mrs. Draper said, "I have a room at the back, quiet. The other guest won't bother you." She named a price that was reasonable. "Breakfast is at 7 if you want it. It's included." Cecily paid her and went upstairs and sat on the bed, and only then, in a room that belonged to neither her husband nor his mother, did she allow herself to cry. Not loudly, not with any particular drama. Just the way a person cries when a very long tension has finally been released, and the body needs somewhere to put what it has been holding. She cried for about 10 minutes. Then she washed her face in the basin, changed her dress, and went to bed. She slept for 6 hours, which was more than she had slept at one stretch in months. She found work faster than she had expected. This was partly luck, and partly the result of the notebook she'd carried out in her trunk, the one with the parallel accounts. She had known, when she packed it, that it was the most valuable thing she owned, not because of what it proved about Harmon, but because of what it proved about her, that she was precise, that she was careful, that she could hold 2 sets of numbers in her head simultaneously and find the place where they diverged. There was a solicitor in town named Mr. Aldgate. He was 70, arthritic, and in the habit of complaining loudly to anyone within earshot that his clerk had left him for a position in the city. and that young men these days had no sense of loyalty or staying power. Cecily had overheard this complaint in the post office on her second day, and she had introduced herself and offered to show him what she could do. He had not believed she could do anything useful. She had understood this and had not taken it personally, having lived long enough with men of a certain generation to know that the resistance was reflexive rather than personal. She spent 3 hours in his office the following morning going through a particular matter that had been troubling him. A discrepancy in a property record that his former clerk had been unable to reconcile. She found the error. It was an old one, dating back decades, and it had been created by the kind of clerical carelessness that compounds over time the way a small crack in a foundation does, quietly, invisibly, until one day the floor tilts. Mr. Aldgate stared at the page. He stared at Cecily. He said, "How did you know to look there?" She said, "I've had practice reading documents where things have been arranged to look right without actually being so." He hired her 3 days later. Not as a clerk. He was not, he said, prepared to go that far, but as an assistant, working from a small desk in the outer office, at a wage he named with some embarrassment, and she accepted without comment because it was more than she had had when she arrived, and the direction mattered more than the quantity. She moved out of the Larkspur and into a pair of rooms above the stationer's shop, which were small and cold and entirely her own. She made her bed every morning and left it unmade in the evenings, sometimes if she didn't feel like making it, which was a freedom so minor and so enormous that she didn't speak of it to anyone. She did not hear from Harmon for 3 weeks. When the letter came, it was brief and had the quality of something that had been composed by a man who was angry, and trying very hard not to appear so, which resulted in a stiffness that communicated the anger more clearly than simply stating it would have. He wrote that she had behaved irrationally. He wrote that she had embarrassed him before guests. He wrote that her place was at Wren Hall and that he expected her to return by the end of the fortnight. He did not apologize. He did not reference what he had said. He had, it seemed, already organized the evening into a version in which the problem had been her departure rather than the circumstances that had produced it. She read the letter twice, then folded it and set it in the back of the notebook with the accounts. Not because she intended to respond to it, because she had learned to keep documentation. She wrote back a single sentence, "I am well, and I have no intention of returning." She sent it. She went back to work. The town was smaller than she was accustomed to, but had the virtue of being legible. She understood its rhythms within a month. Who did business with whom, who owed whom favors, where the information actually moved as opposed to where people believed it moved. Mrs. Draper, who had given Cecily a room at 4 in the morning without asking unnecessary questions, turned out to be a woman of considerable influence in the quiet, lateral way that capable women often are. She knew everyone. She spoke carefully. She had a way of listening that made people feel they had said something perceptive. She and Cecily began to take tea together on Tuesday afternoons, initially because they kept running into each other at the same times, and it had seemed more practical to simply plan for it. They did not discuss Cecily's situation. They discussed, instead, the business matters that interested them both. A property dispute on the western edge of town that had been unresolved for years. The question of whether the postal route was going to change. The particular difficulty of maintaining accurate records when 3 different parties each held a portion of the relevant documents. Cecily found she was happy in these conversations, in a way she had not been happy in conversations for a very long time. She began, tentatively, to understand that happiness was not one thing but a texture. Present or absent in small moments, available to her in ways she had stopped noticing because she had been so occupied with the larger ongoing fact of her unhappiness at Wren Hall. The second letter from Harmon came 6 weeks after the first. This one was longer and had a different quality, less stiff, more uncertain. She could feel, beneath the formal language, a man trying to navigate something he had not prepared for and did not fully understand. He wrote that he had discussed her absence with his mother, and that they were both agreed she should come home. He wrote that he would be willing to make certain adjustments. He did not specify the adjustments. He wrote near the end, in a sentence she read 3 times, "I find I am not comfortable with how things stand between us." This was the closest he had come to saying that her absence had affected him. It was not an apology. It was an acknowledgement that the situation had become inconvenient for him, which was not the same thing. But she held it carefully, the way she would have held a piece of evidence she wasn't yet sure how to read. She wrote back, "If you have something to say to me, you are welcome to come and say it. I am here most mornings before noon." She did not know why she sent that letter. She suspected she was curious. She had spent 2 years in that house, and had never been entirely sure what Harmon Wren was, underneath the habits and the deferences and the things he had learned from his mother. She found she wanted to know, even now. He came on a Thursday. She was at her desk in Mr. Aldgate's outer office when she heard the door, and she looked up, and there was Harmon. He was dressed well, which meant he had thought about this, which told her something. He had not brought his mother. That told her something too. He stood in the doorway for a moment before crossing the threshold. She waited. "You look well," he said finally. "I am well," she said. He came in. She directed him to the chair beside her desk, and went to close the inner office door so they would have some privacy, though she was aware that Mr. Aldgate, behind it, was almost certainly listening. She sat back down. She did not offer tea. She did not ask about the journey. She looked at him and waited, because she had learned from her months in this office that the person who spoke first in a difficult conversations was usually the one who needed something. "You've found work," Harmon said. "Yes." He looked around the office. She could see him calculating something, not what she was worth, she thought, but what it meant that she had not needed him. These were not the same calculation, though for men like Harmon they were often confused. "My mother," he said carefully, "has gone to stay with her sister in Bath." Cecily said nothing. She had been planning the visit for some time, he added. This was almost certainly not true. It seemed appropriate. She waited. He looked at his hands. Then he looked at her. He had always had, she thought, a face that showed more than he intended it to. That had been one of the things she'd noticed when they were first introduced, 6 years ago, at a social gathering she had not particularly wanted to attend. She had thought then that whatever else might be said of him, he was not a man who could lie with his whole face. "What I said at dinner," he said. "To the Penfields." She waited. "It was unkind," he said. "It was more than unkind." He stopped. Tried again. "I have been thinking since you left about why I said it. I do not think I had a good reason. I think I said it because my mother—" He stopped again. His jaw moved. "Go on," she said quietly. "I think I have been saying the things my mother believes for so long that I stopped noticing they were her beliefs and not mine. And I think—" He pressed his hand flat against his knee. "I think I have let that damage something I did not understand the value of until I was looking at it damaged." The office was very quiet. Cecily looked at him. Really looked. The way she had learned to look at documents that might or might not be telling her the truth. She was looking for the place where things diverged. The crack in the foundation. The number that didn't reconcile. She did not find one. That frightened her a little. She had prepared herself for a performance, for a man reciting the correct words without meaning them, and she would have known how to respond to that. She was less prepared for this. "You dismissed me in front of people," she said. "Not for the first time. You let your mother dismantle every change I made to that house, every time, without once saying she was wrong. I do not know if you were too afraid to say it, or if you genuinely agreed with her. And that distinction matters very much." He was quiet for a moment. "That is the honest answer." She considered this. Of what? Of the conflict, of her. A pause. Of not being enough on my own if she withdrew her good opinion. Cecily looked at him for a long time. "Harmon," she said finally, "I am not going to go back and pick up where we left off. I am not going to walk back into that house and behave as though the last 8 weeks did not happen. I am not asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" He looked at her. "I am asking whether there is something to build. Something different." He held her gaze steadily, which cost him something she could tell. "I am asking whether you would be willing to find out." She thought about her rooms above the stationer's. She thought about Tuesday afternoons with Mrs. Draper. She thought about the desk where she sat every morning and the problems she was given to untangle, and the notebook full of numbers that no one had ever found incorrect. She thought about Annalise Penfield, 17, at a table she did not know yet to be afraid of. She thought about what it would mean to go back, and what it would mean to refuse, and she found, somewhat to her own surprise, that these were not as simple as she'd thought they'd be. "I will think about it," she said. "I will not do it quickly, and I will not do it on your schedule or your mother's schedule, and if I decide to, it will be on terms that we establish together, not terms that are handed to me. Do you understand what I mean by that?" "Yes," he said. "And your mother does not return to Wren Hall?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." She looked at him one more time. Then she picked up her pen. "I'll send word when I've decided," she said. "I would not expect it before the end of the month." He rose. He looked as if he might say something else, and then thought better of it, which she noted with some approval. He put on his hat. He walked to the door. "Cecily," he said, at the threshold. She looked up. "You are—" He stopped. House has been very quiet. She thought about what that meant. All the versions of what it might mean. She did not tell him what she thought. She just said, "I know." He left. She sat for a moment after the door closed. Then she opened her ledger and went back to work. Because there was a property matter on her desk that had been waiting 2 days, and the numbers were not going to sort themselves. Mr. Aldgate opened his inner office door approximately 30 seconds later. "I wasn't listening," he said. "Of course not," said Cecily. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Then he said, "You're the best clerk I've had in 40 years. I want that on the record." "I'll note it in the ledger," she said. She did, right there, in the margin, in her precise and accurate hand. And she smiled at it, alone, in the quiet morning light. Not because everything was settled. Not because she knew what she would decide. But because for the first time in longer than she could easily remember, the choice was entirely hers.